All right. Looks like we're ready to go. Good evening, everybody. This is Jeff. And this is Junior Hockey Advisor. Music off here. Junior Hockey Advisor. Wednesday night, we're ready to roll. There is so much to discuss tonight, and there's so many things that I've promised to talk about over the next over the last few weeks that I finally think we have enough ability to talk about. It's going to be a lot of information. I need you to help me. And what I mean by that is help me make sure that I'm on target, that I'm uh, clearly explaining things, that it is not too complex, not oversimplified. Just keep me on task. You can send me a message. Just send me a message on the chat message area and let me know how I'm doing as we go through this. So what are we going to talk about? Some things are pretty straightforward. I've promised you that I would discuss tonight the ability to understand the North American Hockey League and their import rules and how the import rules work. So you're going to jump into that and discuss that tonight. We're going to get into this whole new world. There's so many complexities that are happening over the next, month to 18 months. Roster sizes, scholarships, NIL, the size of rosters. I already said roster size, but the complexity of what that does and the nuances there, along with major junior hockey. Where does this all fit in? How does it fit together? Well, what can we draw from all this information? What can we do with this information? And how can we prepare? I mean, the biggest part of this is there's going to be a ton of changes coming up in junior hockey and in college hockey over the very short term future here. And are we ready for it? What can we do to prepare? And we're going to discuss it. I'm going to need your help though, because this is, once again, there's probably about 8 hours worth of discussion here, and I'm trying to condense it down into a very short period of time. So I will need your help tonight. So jump on right now, chat. Tell me who you are. Tell me where you're at. Tell me, what your interests are. Tell me anything. I'd love to hear from you. Make sure if you're doing this on YouTube to like and subscribe as you go along. I hate to, have to, basically sell the program every week, but that's how we grow. Get the subscription numbers up. Get the viewership up. That's what we always want to do. So, okay. With that said, let's start with the NAHL, and let's start with the import piece of the NAHL. I think that's a great place to start because there's a lot of information there. So, there was a change this year, and there's a little bit of misunderstanding about how the North American Hockey League and its import rules are working. Now, we could talk about import rules for all the different leagues, but this one specifically came up. And because it's the biggest league, it's the Tier 2 league, it pumps out a large amount of Division 1 and Division 3 players combined. It's the largest source of college players in North America. So they're going to be a big part of the conversation tonight in many ways, but we'll start here. So the question came up is, how does this import rule work and what does it mean now? Well, whatever you see on Elite Prospects right now, whatever you see on team websites, I'd pay little attention to it right now because information will be inaccurate. I believe I just talked to the NAHL front office today, had a long, nice conversation with them. I believe they said that early this week, Monday this week, was when when the final deadline for 24-man rosters was in play. And when I say that, because there's different stages, you got to have your roster submitted by this date. It's frozen by this date. All the transfers and anything that has to happen, there's different deadlines on the back end of that. And that's more administrative stuff, not something we're really concerned about. But what I am concerned about is that you understand that you are going to see up to 6 players on a roster now that are not U.S. players. Okay. It's going to be 4, players that are non-Canadian and 2 Canadians. I believe they can get a third Canadian in there depending on how they bring them through on the roster. but it'll never be more than 6. And right now, some rosters are showing up to 10. Don't worry about that. That's all it'll all flow through. Where would you find this information if you're not looking at Elite Prospects and you're not looking at the team's website, their website? Well, you can go to USA Hockey, and I believe USA Hockey. I don't know if I can pull this up for you, and this may not be public yet. So if I can show it to you, just remember that this is not. Let me see if I can throw this up there. If I can. Okay, yeah. Okay, so this is a NAHL protected list. This is on the USA Hockey website. I think if you go to USA Hockey protected list. Now, once again, this will go public soon. And the reason I'm showing you this, and let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger. It isn't important which team this is. I don't know if you can tell which team it is. It's not important. It's not important what the names are. What is important to know is you see that USA, right down here in the middle, tells you their country of origin, their citizenship. And next to it, there's little codes. Most people are going to have questions about that. Now, roster sizes will be at 24. You might see 25 or 26, but if you go all the way over to this far side over here, to the right side of the document, you'll see a date over there. That's the injury date. So if the number's above 24 on the protected roster, that's because they have an injured player or two. So if there's 25, you'll see one injured date over there. If there's 26, you'll see 2 over there. Now, the biggest thing is they kind of explain these codes and to know what these codes are. Right next to citizenship, where you see USA, other, Canadian, you see all those words there. And I'm wondering if you're seeing this. Yeah, you are. You're seeing this document the way I see it. Okay, what does some of those codes mean? Well, I'm looking at it, and it's a little difficult to see because it's small. But the first little code is a third player down. It says RC. That just means that his release was complete. That means they picked him up from another junior team. And when they picked him up from another junior team, he had to be released from that. The next code down is, excuse me, is from a foreign player, and it says TC. That means the transfer was complete. So you've got RC and TC. Those are 2 big codes that are used quite a bit. IC just means that it's an import. You'll see that code next to a player. After the TC is done, it'll go to IC in many cases. So there's nothing really special there, but people ask a lot of questions about what those codes are. You'll see NR listed, like the very bottom one there. It's about 2/3 of the way down the column. It's a USA player, and it says NR. That just means release was not required. In other words, however they picked him up, they did not need a release for the player at that time. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea. I didn't want to spend a lot of time showing you the protected list. Once again, that protected list will show up pretty soon to the public. And then all of a sudden you'll see the elite prospects list. They'll start making more sense. And the team roster that they show you online is probably, like if I go to Lone Star and I look at Lone Star's roster online that they publish for, their fans, that's probably the least reliable, because they may have had a player that came up from a U18 team that they leave on there. They've only played for the weekend, but they leave him on their roster, so he's there. And it's almost a recruiting tool. In many cases, it is a recruiting tool, and that there is no priority to keep that up to date like the USA Hockey requirements that come along with the protected list. You cannot play a player in a game without them being on the protected list. Okay, so if I pick up a new player and he's not on the protected list, he can't play that night. So it has to be done. It has to be precise. It has to be done exact by USA Hockey rules. Otherwise, that player is not eligible for that night or that weekend or whatever the event is. So that's pretty much it. You're going to see 4 Europeans, 2 Canadians. Some teams will have 3 or 4 Canadians, but it's how they brought the Canadian in, and that gets a little more complex. The way it was explained to me was, let's say a Canadian was playing Well, first of all, you could have more than 2 Canadians on a roster right away. You could have 3, 4, or 5 if they played 3 years of youth hockey consecutively in the United States. So if you had a kid that lived over in Sarnia or Windsor, is coming across the border to play for Honeybaked, maybe he went to prep school for 3 years and played 3 years of prep school before juniors. Even though they're Canadian, they are no longer Canadian when it comes to the roster. They are considered a player that can be used just like an American player on the roster. So that's one way you'll see the number of Canadians, and you'll go, wow, my team's got 6 Canadians. How does that work? Well, if you go back and look at their history, you'll see that some of those players may have 3 years of eligibility that came through. So hopefully that helps. Bud, good to see you coming on. Welcome, and I hope you enjoy the information. And if you got any questions, folks, throw them up on the chat wherever you're at. I will go and check the Facebook chat groups from time to time too on the screens, just to make sure that some of you aren't posting on areas that might not be showing up on my feed. So as it stands right now, we're good to go. Okay, so that gets us through the basic, what's going on with the NAHL and the amount of players. So you can see 6 players easily that are import players, 4 from Europe, 2 from Canada. And you can expect that. I would expect to see 4 to 6 import players on every team. You get a couple that are very diehard when it comes to staying with an American roster, and that's okay too. I think, and I don't have it up in front of me right now, but I think a team like Wendigo may be a team that falls into that category. And I'm just seeing if I can pull that up real quick. I don't think I can. So I'm not even going to try now. Not even going to try. So, okay. If you have a question about that, throw it on. Frank, good to see you. Jeff, good to see you. Glad to see you guys jumping on. Frank, any questions, let me know. Jeff, any questions, let me know. As we cover, just various topics that are all have been kind of building up and have been in the news in other areas. So I really want to get onto this major junior conversation. And this is going to take a lot to kind of walk through it and kind of explain what's being proposed and what's being voted on. And the vote is impending right now at the NCAA level. It has a little to do with a lawsuit that's coming out of the Buffalo market, class action, dealing with players and their ability to basically make a living. Now that there's NIL, that's the name, image, and likeness that's available to all NCAA Division I athletes. That means I can make money off of my name, my image, and my likeness. I can do commercials. I can go to a speaking event and show up at I can show up at a tailgate party and be paid to be at a tailgate party pregame. Not that would be a good idea pregame, but I could do that. Postgame, I can sign autographs for a fee. I can sell my jerseys can be sold where I get a cut of those jerseys. So now that that's happened, athletes are going back and going, wait a minute, you precluded me. I went to major junior hockey. And most of you know that if I go to major junior hockey, I lose my eligibility to play hockey in NCAA at the NCAA Division I level. I can no longer, vie for that scholarship and go to Michigan, BC, BU, North Dakota, wherever I want to go. Once I cross that threshold and considered a major junior hockey player, I'm done. My amateur status as far as the NCAA is concerned is gone. Well, it's a little bit of a hypocrisy now because of the fact that there could be athletes in football and basketball. There certainly, and some in track athletes too. There's certainly athletes now that are making as much money as they can make as if they're a rookie in the league that their respective leagues. For example, there's quarterbacks in NCAA Division I football now that are making 2-3 times more than what a rookie makes in the NFL. So it's hard to say, hey, you're up playing in the major juniors in the OHL or the WHL or the Quebec Junior Hockey League, and you're getting a stipend and you are, playing pro hockey. So you're no longer allowed to come back to the States and play NCAA hockey. It's kind of it really is. It reeks of hypocrisy now. It no longer makes sense. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be fixed. Now, purist, and I would consider myself a purist in many ways. Look at this and go, oh no, we've kind of had our thing. We had, the college hockey purists, and you had the guys that wanted to, just go straight to the pros. And what does that mean? What does it do? How does it change? Well, change is inevitable here. Um, you've got the lawsuit, you've got the NIL, you've got this roster change item that's coming up too, which I'll explain a little bit of, which happens in the 25-26 season, where the NCAA is mandating that all of the hockey teams at the Division I level move up to 25, I believe it is. They're capping the roster size at 25. Okay, hold that thought for a second. But they're also mandating that you go from 18 scholarships to 25 scholarships. So in many cases, programs are picking up, 6, 7 scholarships. Well, everybody capped out at a max of 18 in the old system. Now you'll be able to roster every single player as a full scholarship player, and that's all you have. So there's no, right now you could have a player that's got a partial scholarship, or you could have 5 players on partial scholarships. You could have a roster of 30 and have 10, 12 players that are on partial scholarships and only a few players that are on full scholarships. And you may have a couple athletes that have nothing, that have no scholarship whatsoever, the pure walk-on candidate. So all that goes away. Now you're capped. You'll have 25, I believe the number was, and they're all scholarships. So you're picking up 7 scholarships. That's a good number. That's really nice. That means that's more scholarship athletes. A lot of people are complaining though that, oh my gosh, so many teams, the average number is probably around 28 or 29 as far as teams, what they're carrying as far as players. They're going to have to cut 3 kids to be able to make the numbers, 3 or 4 kids. And I look at that differently. I don't look at that as a negative. I look at that as an extreme positive. And what I mean by that is the likelihood of those cutting scholarships is not happening, because you're bottoming your roster at that point. If you're carrying 28 or 29, there are going to be partial or no scholarship athletes anyway. So in fact, usually it's 4, 5, 6 guys on the roster, up to 10, maybe even 12 guys on your roster are partial or no scholarship guys. I mean, if you're running a pure roster and you're giving 18 scholarships to your best 18 players that you scholarship, you can have 12 guys that don't have any money coming in. So having to cut 2 or 3 people that don't have scholarship money and picking up the benefit of being able to give, from the number 19 guy on the roster all the way up to the number 25 guy on the roster are now full scholarship guys. I see that as a very big positive. Now, some people are taking the side of this and saying, hey, Jeff, you're being naive. All these schools, they can't afford it. Yeah, but most can. Okay. Most can. You'll find a way. And what I say about how you can't afford it is somebody's got to pay the piper. If the NCAA is mandating that you pick up, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, that's 7 scholarships there. So if your tuition is $40,000, you can see how that adds up, pretty quick as far as the amount of money. The last time I checked, if you're adding 7 scholarships at $40,000, that's $280,000, or somewhere right around there, without having a calculator in front of me. Did I do that right? 7 times 4 is 28. Yeah, that's right. Good job, Jeff. Got the math down. I'll give myself a check mark for doing some math. All right. So it's $280,000 added to the school's budget for hockey. And this is happening across the board. It's happening in many sports. And some are saying, oh my gosh, that's going to break the bank. Some of these programs won't be able to survive. Maybe, maybe, uh, but that's all part of what's happening. And um, usually, what happens is when these things come up like this, there is a need to be more efficient. There's a need to be more innovative, and there's a need to fix things so that these things can happen. Don't forget that we had a whole league just just barely a decade ago. We had a whole league inside of NCAA Division One hockey that did not have any scholarships. They didn't offer scholarships, and you had Mercyhurst, Canisius, Niagara, RIT, Holy Cross, all those schools, they did not offer scholarships. The only two that offered scholarships in that league were Army and Air Force, because every kid in Army and Air Force get a scholarship. So um, that's part of the whole discussion right now. Is okay, they went from no scholarships up to 18 scholarships and they survived. What if they can do it and add 18 in? And some of those schools are smaller schools. They're not big schools. RIT is a pretty big school, but you look at some of those other campuses. Mercyhurst is not a big campus. Canisius is not a big campus. Niagara is not a big campus. These are schools that are small to small medium sized campuses. So it's worth discussing. Where's this money going to come from? But that brings up another side to this. If we've got this mandate coming where we're increasing scholarships, more kids out there are going to get scholarships. That's a beautiful thing. But some of these schools, I came up with a phrase earlier today when I was looking at this, and it's Dino and Dino, Division One in name only. Are there schools out there that really shouldn't be Division One schools because it's not really a Division One, experience for the athlete? and that's, I really don't want to be the one to make that decision on what schools are Dino schools and what schools are not. But clearly, in the 64 schools that are Division One schools right now, there are schools that are not equal when it comes to Division One. Now you could say the same thing. Holy smokes! Look at Ohio State, look at UCLA, look at USC, look at Michigan on the football or basketball side. How do you even try to compare them to a Bowling Green? You can't, and it's not the same experience. That's true to an extent, but not as extreme as hockey gets. We've got some schools out there in the hockey world that they're working on a two-man crew, a coach and assistant coach. They're working with no recruiting budget, virtually no recruiting budget. They're working on very limited travel budgets. They're working at rinks that are subpar to what a Division One experience is. Now, I commend a lot of schools. You saw a lot of schools that stepped up to the plate over the last few years and improved their whole experience because they were now, and I'm just outside of Rochester, New York. I live about probably 45 minutes away from the RIT campus. Used to be an assistant coach there. When I was a coach at RIT, the rink was very small and very old, and it got very packed, but it was subpar for Division One. Now, I loved it because it was very intimate and it was a great place to play, and it was good ice. The facility they have now is a clearly a Division One rink, and that's great. So, maybe there's some weeding out in this. Maybe there's some programs that really, have to rethink and relook and re-audit, self-evaluate, and look at the Division III ranks again and say, hey, are we better off as a Division III program? Are we better off as an ACHA program? Do we offer a better product for our student athletes at that level? Or is it really that important to be Division I? Now, I'm not the one to make that decision. I just know that we've got some schools out there. I wouldn't even, when it comes to size, if you look just at the size thing, the Niagaras of the world, the St. Lawrences of the world, the Clarksons, these are, at times all these programs have had good runs where they've made a run into the playoffs at the end of the year, the NCAAs, and they've done a good job. It's been few and far between, and they're very, there's the list can go on and on there. There's probably 10 schools that fall in that category that are probably going to seriously have to look at this NCAA Division I issue and reevaluate. So what do you think on that? Give me your comments. I clearly am not the expert on this, but it leads into our next discussion, which is the vote that is coming up this week on major junior hockey. If major junior hockey is allowed to participate at the NCAA Division I level, if those players pre or post their experience with pro hockey and major junior hockey are allowed to, in other words, if I go to major junior hockey and play 1 or 2 years, and then I go to an AHL camp and I get cut, and then I decide, I want to go back and use my eligibility. I'm still young. I'm 20, 21 years old. That athlete is going to be allowed in the door now. So if that athlete is allowed in the door into NCAA hockey, what does it mean? Where are we going with this? And there's a lot of things to talk about, because it's a trickle-down effect directly into junior hockey. So NCAA Division I hockey could change. I'm going to go through some numbers. I'm going to go through some numbers quickly with you to talk about, what this looks like and what, potential issues you have with this. When I say you, I mean us. So right off the bat, let me get I've got a screen over here I want to jump to, and I want to show you. Okay, so I want to show you NCAA players in the NHL first. I want to give you the bigger view and talk about it. I think everybody knows, what the NHL looks like and how many teams the NHL has. I wrote the number down. I kind of forgot now how many teams are in the NHL. Maybe one of you could remind me how many on there. Is there, 20-something odd teams in the NHL? It should be something easy that I have in front of me, but I don't. So let's not worry about that, because it's a percentage is what I'm more concerned with anyway. So I'm going to pull up and show you a graph real quick that kind of gives you an idea. Here we go. Okay, so I think I can expand this a little bit bigger. All right, this is the NCAA, and this is going from 2004 to 2005. The blue bar, 2004 to 2005, and then it goes up every 5 years. The second blue bar is the 2009, 2010. The third bar is 2014, 2015. Then we go to 19 and 20. Then we go to our current last season we just played. Now, you NHL aficionados will probably go, but Jeff, there was no hockey in the 04-05 season, and you're completely right. That's actually the numbers from the 03-04 year. But what I try to do is to give you 5-year increments. And the blue number is the amount of Canadian players inside of the NHL, and the green box is the amount of American players inside of the NHL. So if you look at the first one, whoops, sorry, I'll get that back up for you. Did not mean to pull that down. And I'll put it right back up. So we look at that first bar, and that first bar shows you that there's 50 some odd players. And really, I want you to see the relationship. Over the course of the last 20 years, the amount of Canadians has decreased every year since 2009 and 10. Okay, it stayed the same from 04 to 05 to 9 and 10. And then for the next 15 years, 20 years, the number is dropped, 15 years, I'm sorry, the number has dropped. So that's important to know. It's important to know that, we're not seeing a growth on the Canadian side of players. But if you look at the green bars, since 2004 and 5, we've had a steady climb of players from the United States that are playing in the NHL. So very significant to know that right off the bat, are we concerned about losing players if the major junior players are allowed to come into the NCAA ranks and kind of have a second choice or second opportunity? I don't know what the answer is there. I really don't. I don't know. All I wanted to show you is the relationship with the amount of players that are Canadian and the amount of players that are American, and we have closed that gap significantly over the last 20 years, and that's important. It's extremely important because people are concerned that this is going to change NCAA Division I hockey. And my first argument on that is, really? So if I'm sitting up in Ontario and I'm being recruited, I get drafted, fairly well into the OHL, and I got a chance. I know I'm going to make the team where, my current coaches, their coaching staff, maybe my advisor, which in the case of that player would be an agent, because there's no gray area anymore between agent and advisor. Everybody can have an agent here pretty soon, the way I'm reading this, and maybe rightfully so, because with NIL, you're already a paid athlete. So even if you're only getting $50 a month to be, the local car dealerships, there to sign, flags on game day, you're still a pro athlete. The fact that you're collecting some kind of money on this. So if this changes like this, are we really going to see an influx? Well, I read earlier one article, it was a pretty good way of saying it. They said, well, if you wanted to be a D1 athlete and that's what you aspired to be, you'd have already gone down that road, because you'd have started that pursuit at 16, 17, and 18 years old, just like some other Canadians do. It's not uncommon to see Canadians play in USA hockey, play hockey in the US and play in Division I college. So to say that they're going to come and take spots, I'm not really sure that that's a fair assessment on that. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are and what you're thinking on that, as far as our players headed towards us from the WHL, our players heading to us from the OHL and from the Quebec League. Those are our three major junior leagues. Are we going to see an influx? The other side of this is, and that's a great statement right off the bat. If they were going to come, they'd probably already come. And where are they if we don't see them already? So that's the first part of that. The second part of the argument is, why would you leave the major junior ranks? Why would you leave and come to play NCAA hockey? A lot of players that are, if you're brought up in a traditional Canadian market, and if you're Canadian, jump on. If you've got experience with this, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this too. Even if you're watching this on a replay, I'd love to hear what your experience and your thoughts are on this. But if I'm a Canadian and I'm planning on going to the OHL, or I'm already in the OHL and I'm playing there, I think of one thing and one thing only, and that's hockey. I don't have to worry about the NCAA eligibility. I don't have to worry about any rules as far as compliance, as far as the NCAA is concerned. I'm playing like a pro. I'm treated like a pro, and I'm learning the pro lifestyle. For many, many athletes, that is very, very preferable to being a student athlete. Some it's because they're possibly they're not good students, and they're not, either by maturity or just the fact that they don't, have an interest in being a student. That's perfectly okay. It happens in every sport, but that might be one reason. But the other one is, what am I really gaining? If I've got an opportunity to go play in the OHL and then pursue the 10, 15 pro leagues, including Europe, the NHL, OHL, the EHL, the SP, and then all the European leagues and the Federal League. And, there's so many leagues out there right now that are oriented towards pro hockey. is there really a need for me to go back and go be in a much more confined space as far as the freedom I have as an athlete? I can't sleep in if my body's sore. I can't. I can't let loose as much when I want to let loose, and I say that in a very careful manner, not trying to make it sound like everybody's got to go out and party and get a keg every Friday night after a game. But NCAA athletes are kind of held to a different standard. Now, being an NCAA athlete, I didn't go the major junior college route. I take pride in the fact that I played in a system where we had to adhere to rules. Your academics, it came first. You had to be in class. So that means, Sunday was a study day. Monday, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, you're right back in the classroom. So your treatments, your ability to go in and get your swollen ankle taken care of, or your bruise taken care of, or your strain taken care of, that had to work around classes. So you really became a time manager, and you were exhausted pretty much all the time. Do we really think those guys are going to come back, in droves to play Division I hockey? I don't know the answer to that. I don't. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And let's go the other route. Right now, are you going to see an influx of Americans going up to play in the major junior routes because they know they can come back? Well, the answer to that one's pretty simple. The answer is no, because it's restricted space. They're only right now, unless the rules change, you're not going to go up and play in that league. You're not going to bypass the USHL to go play in the OHL. Now, there's a select few, but that number is really small. The amount of Americans playing in the OHL, right now there's 34 players in the OHL that are U.S. players. There's 59 total players that are U.S. Now, mind you, the WHL has 6 American teams. The Western Hockey League, they have teams in Washington. They have teams in, is it Oregon too? But there's 6 teams out there now that are American. But they still only have, 4.3% of their players. Only 4.3% of their players are U.S. in the WHL. The OHL has 3 teams. They've got Saginaw. They've got Flint, Saginaw, and Erie are the OHL teams now. Yet they only have 7% of their players are American in the whole league. So, and then the Q, I think the Q has less than 1% of their league is American. So, you're once again, your number of overall players in those leagues is drastically lower than the amount of players that are Canadians that are allowed to play down in the NAHL and play in the USHL, which are the 2 Division I conduits, which hopefully is also the conduit to get you to pro hockey, if that makes sense. So let's see. Troy's got something to say, and then we'll get back to the conversation. Troy says, a few teams went Tier 3 EHL to Tier 2 NCDC. Those teams are considered experimental pay-to-play teams. Tier 2 is free-to-play. Will this continue next year, or will they be free? I think the jury is still out. The last time I talked to one of those coaches was 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think the idea is that they're going to be they're going to hold steady. But the reason they did not get the nod to be permanent is because it's still an experiment. So I don't know the answer to that, Troy. I don't know if anybody really knows the answer to that yet. If they do, that's a guarded conversation that's being had at higher levels. But right now, yes, Tier 2 is free to play. But there's also conversation going on that that whole model is going to become a pay to play again. And that they're going to start, gradually moving back into, a incremental pay to play. So that's, let's put that in the TBD category. I can't tell you what direction that's going, but thank you for throwing that up there. That was a good kind of chance to segue away a little bit and say, hey folks, we got other things we can chat about for a second, just to get us back on topic, but clear our minds a little bit. All right, so major junior hockey, 3 leagues: WHL, OHL, the Q. 22 teams in the WHL. Of that, the WHL is 90% Canadian, 4.3% US. That equates to 24 players. The OHL is 20 teams, 3 are US-based teams. So, think about this. There's 9 teams that are US-based teams for this league. Yet, even the American teams, that's the funniest thing about this. Even the teams that are based in the US, they have just a sprinkling, just a taste of U.S. players in these leagues. And, once again, 59 between the 3 leagues. Once again, the Q, there's 18 teams in the league. None of them are in the U.S. 91% of this is Canadian. 1% is the U.S. That equates to 4 players. So overall, less than 60 players this year are playing in all of major junior hockey by design of that league. So it's not like Americans are going to be able to take a lot of advantage of this. Pretty much the same amount of Americans that are taking advantage of this already. Maybe the number goes up a little bit. I don't know if everybody's maxed on their amount of Americans they have on the teams. I didn't go to that extent in research because I just didn't have time. So the question is, are they when these 3 teams become eligible for the NCAA, and everything is kind of on par, the USHL, maybe even the NAHL to some extent, and these major junior programs, as far as the NCAA is concerned, they're on par. Does that mean that they're going to open up and change the rules for the amount of Americans that can join these teams? And, I know that these are, even though they fall under the CHL, the Canadian Hockey League, and there's this umbrella, these leagues are very regional. They're very restricted and they're very protective of their areas. So, for example, the WHL only recruits in the West. The Ontario Hockey League recruits in Ontario and a little bit of a sliver of states below them into the United States. Quebec gets the East Coast of the United States to an extent, and also, takes care of Quebec and East as far as what their recruiting area is. So because they're so restrictive there, I'm not really sure we're going to see a big door opening for the highway to go 2 ways. So does that mean the USHL and the NAHL, maybe even talking and getting into the independent leagues like the USPHL, is there a loosening of the amount of Canadians that can come out of teams because of the pressure from the NCAA to have these Canadian players come down and play on Division I teams? I can't answer that, but I can tell you we got to be thinking about that. And right now, is it possible that's why the NAHL loosened up their policies as far as players coming from Europe and coming from Canada? Maybe, and they're just getting ready for, this next, change that's coming up, which is allowing these players to have NCAA capabilities coming out of the major juniors. So I don't know if this helped or hurt. I'd love to hear from you, knowing if this conversation is, resonating. Is it helping? We didn't talk about the BCHL. Just to give you an idea, the BCHL has 21 teams. None of the BCHL is in the U.S. at this point. I don't believe. There might be one. I'd have to go back and check. There used to be one team. Maybe I'm going to do that right now, because I think that we used to have one up there, because I remember going and watching them, and I don't know if we still have them or not. But if you give me a second, I will go and check to see as we speak and to clarify that. So while we're doing that, isn't Wenatchee? Yeah, I'll do that later. Who cares? Not that important right now. It doesn't take away from our conversation. Anyway, 65% of that league is Canadian. That's a high point in Canada as far as U.S., because that league is independent and they can kind of do their own thing. 30% of that league is U.S. And the U.S. players that come there is it's drastic. There's just a very, very high percentage of players that come out of our prep leagues on the East Coast. They go up and play 1 year in the BCHL and then move on to Division One. And that's 162 players when you want to know what 30% of the BCHL is. So how does that compare to the USHL? The USHL has 16 teams versus the BCHL's 21 teams. And 16 are in the U.S. Of course, that's the USHL. 78% Americans, 9% Canadian. So there's 41 players, Canadian players, inside of the USHL. Finally, there's the NAHL. Wenatchee. I knew I'd been up there watching Wenatchee in the United States. I just forgot if they there was talk of them. Never mind. I don't even want to get into that, but I just didn't pay attention to them this year to know. So you heard me say Wenatchee. I was kind of there, but thank you so much, Juicy Brucey, for getting on and clarifying that for me. So the NAHL is 35 teams, 35 are U.S. based, 78% Americans, and that leaves 11% that are Canadian. That's 102 Canadian players. So Shelley comes on and says, Americans aren't imports in the CHL. They may not be considered imports because imports are usually considered the Europeans or the Asian markets and the European markets and the Eastern European markets. However, those numbers are still contained as far as the amount of U.S. players. So not considered that. But if you know something different on that, Shelley, point it out to me, because there is no way in the world that the numbers for leagues like the WHL would only have 4.3% or 24 total U.S. players in there. That's about averages just over one per team when you've got the whole Western United States to draw from. You would think that number would be much, much higher to that, 10, 15, 20%, especially when you have 6 U.S.-based teams. Anybody that puts any thought into that would say, hey, if I put some local kids on these teams that are talented kids, that's going to draw more fans into the stands. So the restriction is not called imports because we use that term in the junior hockey for the Europeans and Asian markets and Eastern European markets, Russia, and the Russian satellite countries. So let me know what you think on that. I don't know really where this is going. I can't tell you that. Oh, I wanted to finish. So we kind of covered it all. The total amount of teams in the CHL, you've got 42, 52, you've got 60 teams. That's your major junior. You got 60 teams there. Between the BCHL, the USHL, and the NAHL, you've got 37, you've got 67, you've got 72 teams. So you got 72 teams and 60 teams, which feed just a ton of the amount of percentage of players into NCAA hockey. That 72 number, not the WHL number. So you're adding almost the same amount of teams that are now have players eligible to jump over into the NCAA ranks. How many NCAA teams are there? There's 64. They're all U.S. based. And right now it's 62% are Americans. That's about 1,100 players. And 29% of that is Canadian. And that's about 532. So you can clearly see that there's room for opportunity for the WHL to come in and influence those numbers. But the reason I started off this whole conversation with the NHL and showing you where the trend lines were in the NHL, because that's your water level. No matter where these kids played beforehand, you still have the amount of what it is when you get to the NHL. You've got a Canadian market that's slowly decreasing in numbers. Anybody that's concerned about hockey has been concerned about that for years, not because you don't want to see European hockey get better and American hockey get better. You just don't want to see the numbers drop in Canada, which has always been the prime pump for all pro hockey. But that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a Canadian market that's slowly, devolving, while Europe and the United States is evolving. And what I mean by evolving, don't forget, all the expansion in the NHL has been in the United States. Uh, there's been replacement teams up in Canada into a former market, but all the new teams. So you've got Seattle, now you've got Utah, you've got Dallas, you've got all the Florida teams, you got all the teams in California. All these are new markets and brought in a lot of new players. Over the years, we've seen just a ton of great hockey players. California, just a few years ago, had this just massive influx of players that were moving right into the NHL level ranks because of their development model. Where did that come from? We all know where that came from. That came from the trade that brought Gretzky into the market, and the baby boom of young hockey people. And I say baby boom because as they had kids, they got them involved in hockey. People that liked what Wayne Gretzky was and what the LA Kings were, and then you saw the Anaheims and you saw the San Jose's. All these teams came in and grew a new market for us, and it was a market in our biggest population possible to grow. Texas having a team, boom. Texas has a ton of minor league pro now, not anymore. That's all gone to the NAHL. But for years, Texas had always led in the amount of semi-pro teams in hockey around. Not in Dallas, but around the rest of the state. Not so much now, but hockey's still huge down there and has grown into a market of its own where now you're starting to see guys that are coming out of Texas, out of Florida, these non-traditional markets. So we've got a growth pattern here. Now, it's not crazy growth. I showed you the graph, but it's a steady increase in growth. Do we really have to be wary of this as a change? I don't know. I just don't think that if I'm a Canadian, I'm as concerned about NCAA hockey, especially when there's a whole U Sport system. And if you don't know what U Sport is kind of like our NCAA, but different at the same time. Yes, you can get a scholarship to play there, but you can go there after the AHL. You can go there after playing in the East Coast League. You can use your money from the OHL or the WHL to go to a U Sport school and use your scholarship money you earned when you played major junior hockey to go to these schools. And that was the only avenue if you wanted to continue to play hockey. If I went to the OHL, got done and said, okay, now I want to go to college after the O. And by the way, I've got $200,000 of scholarship money that I earned while I was there. I could go play, club hockey in the United States, which a lot of guys do, or I could go play U Sport if I wanted something a little more competitive, a lot more competitive than most, college club programs. So, yeah, I just don't know if those if the NCAA is big of a deal. My son played up in the AJHL, was recruited heavily into the BCHL before he went to the NAHL and was drafted into the USHL. And when that was all going on, now this is a few years ago, but when that was all going on, the feeling from his teammates, the NCAA route wasn't a top of mind discussion with a large percentage of the team. Now, I'm not saying that was 50%. I'm not saying that was 80%, but there was definitely always a handful of players, and he played for several teams when he was up in Canada, that just really never had an intention of going to the States to go to college. And so be it, that if my only option was after playing a college sport, or playing a sport in high school, or playing, what junior is, no matter what the sport is. And everybody said, well, your only option is go to college in Mexico. And I'm pretty content with, living in New York or Michigan or Ohio. God forbid, I don't know why anybody would live there. There's Ohio State's there. My point is, maybe it's not as big of a deal for as many people as we think it is, and this doesn't become a major issue. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So another conversation came up here. It says, I'm pretty sure there is no restriction per the CHL on number of Americans. As far as I know, the only restriction is 2 imports per team. Your point stands on who ends up in the CHL. Okay. Yeah. For some reason, I know the American rules. I know our leagues. I'm pretty good because I scout up there and I know a lot of the GMs and coaches up there. I'll make a call. I'll make sure I'm clarified. And then I'll just call the league tomorrow I'll call the league office and talk to somebody in the OHL. I've had great conversations with them over the years, and they usually clarify things. I just always thought that there was a limit on the amount of Americans that are allowed. Remember, it's one of the reasons why the BCHL left their league. Now, once again, BCHL was playing in the CJHL under Hockey Canada, not playing under the CHL and Major Junior. So, two different governing bodies, but I was always under the impression that there's got to be a reason. There's too many, think about the markets. If you got Flint and Saginaw that are literally in the back door of Little Caesars, Honey Baked, CompuWare, the development program, and yet they're running one player per team that are U.S. based and they're U.S. teams. I find that hard to believe that they're doing that by design. That their teams are saying, you know what, by gosh, I'm in Saginaw, Michigan, or I'm in Flint, Michigan, and I'm going to run practically all Canadian players here. Maybe I'm wrong. And Shelley, I'm gonna listen to you, and I'm gonna listen to anybody else that's popped up on the other boards and say, until I can prove you wrong, you're right, and we'll go from there and see if I can clarify that. Either way, it'll be an educational experience for me because I'll get a chance to reconnect with some people and talk hockey, which is what I tend to do, quite a bit. Folks, we've been going at this for an hour. Tell me what you think. Even if you pondered a little bit, it's so difficult to understand where we're going with this. This lawsuit coming out of Buffalo, which is changing the size and the scope of our Division I programs in college. What does that mean? That means more kids are going to get scholarships, full scholarships, not partial, full scholarships. Remember, right now, no team can give more than 18 full scholarships. Now, they can break it into, as many little pieces as they want, but it's only 18 that are total that you can give. So if I can only give 18 scholarships, all of a sudden now I can give 25. Well, that means I can recruit better players and get my roster deeper and take care of my players. And the locker room has a sense of equality then because everybody's getting the same thing. No matter what, it's always very difficult as a coach when you've got one player over here that's got a full ride scholarship and you've got another player over here that's got 25% scholarship, and you want desperately to give him 50%, but you just don't have the funds to do that, and you've either got to wait or you got to restructure. You got to cut somebody to make room. It's just not fun doing that. This is taking that all off the table, which is a great thing in the long run, if you ask me. Dropping a roster down to 25 from 28 or even 30, because there are some teams around 30. People can say that, you can't exist for a 30, 35 game year with just 25 players. And my answer to that is bullcrap. You can, because there's always, 5, 10, 15 people that are committed to your team at any point that are playing in the USHL. They could start at their semester break. There are players out there you could find. Now you got the portal. There's just so many ways to you can pull up a D3 player. There's so many ways to fill a roster if you really got in desperate needs. But the Big Ten, which used to be the CCHL up until a few years ago, but the Big Ten schools were always running 23 to 25 until about 4 or 5 years ago. That was their number. You can go back and historically look at that. They always ran very, very thin rosters. Part of it was because they didn't like to have, a lot of fat. They want to play the guys that are on the team. They don't want that worry of having 5 guys they can't get on the roster or into games. And in that situation, if you're carrying 28, now you got 8 guys, you're carrying 30. You got 10 guys that are not in the roster every weekend. So you got 10 guys in the stands, and that's very difficult. That's very difficult to coach that way. It's hard to coach. We're eliminating that problem. So now you've got the roster size changing. You got major junior hockey, possibly the doors being open to be able to access those players, which is a good thing in the long run. More access to good quality players. What does it do to our juniors? That's what this discussion was about. Does it change things or what pressures are put on. I'm sure that there's 10 things that we didn't even think about discussing tonight about this as this gets closer to happening, different angles and different, because people will be manipulative. They'll always be trying to figure out their angle on attacking this. Okay, fine. We'll find out more about, how this is going to play out as it gets closer. Does the NAHL get affected more than the others? I think the NAHL is more susceptible to being weakened by this than any other league. And the first reason why is if this becomes a war for players, when you have, think of Germany back in World War II, when you have too much area to protect and you have too big of an area to protect and you've got battlefronts on several sides of you, it's a losing combination. The NAHL is the biggest, 35 teams. Okay. And to protect those markets and to protect those teams at that size, it's going to be very, very difficult to do. So I think just by size and scope, and that they're a step below the USHL, meaning they're not getting, it's rare, one or two NHL, usually goalies, but usually one or two NHL prospects a year come out of the NAHL. And between the USHL, BCHL, and the NAHL, they're always in third place between those three leagues. The USHL clearly, I mean, they're as a percentage of players, those 16 teams kick butt on the WHL, the OHL, and the Q as individual leagues. When you combine all three of those leagues, that's where all your pro players are coming from as a percentage. But the USHL, clearly by a percentage, is killing it, and that's partly because they've got the national training program, and partly because they're doing a really good job. They haven't overexpanded that league. They've kept it nice and tight. They're in non-traditional, for the most part, markets and that corn belt of the United States, that, those Iowas and those North and South Dakotas and those Wisconsins, and, they've got that whole kind of bread belt taken care of there without really stepping into regular traditional hockey markets that much. The NAHL hasn't done that. The NAHL has dove, deep into traditional hockey markets, and is just, I think their flanks are exposed. So, that's one guy's opinion. I love the NAHL. I love all these leagues, but I've spent a lot of time with the NAHL. I've worked in the NAHL, and I want to see them succeed. But boy, oh boy, I just think that they're open and susceptible. Let's see what Richard has to say. Then we're going to call it quits for the night, folks. Feel free to throw your comments up, throw your questions up, and I'll get to them as the week goes on here. Being on Long Island, hoping my son has a chance at NCAA scholarship someday. I find it hard to believe the NCAA schools that have hockey programs will not start looking to bring in Canadians and make it harder for my son. He'll just have to rise above and earn it. Yeah, that's a great statement, Richard. I get it. I agree that there's, they're going to look for the best players. I guess I didn't say that, enough. Clearly, all these NCAA teams are going to reach out and try to fight it. They're going to take advantage of this and try to pull there. I just don't know if there's as big of a percentage of players to pull out of that market, major junior. Hey, if I'm on the top third of the roster and I know I've got a really good shot to get a good East Coast job, a good European job, or, possibly an AHL job, which is the ultimate goal coming out of major junior hockey, is you want to try to get to the AHL as soon as possible. Now, the top 1% of that league wants to jump right into the NHL, but the reality is drafted NHL players that are playing in the major junior hockey league, they want to get out and get their entry-level contract into the AHL so they can start, honing their craft to get into the NHL. Second round, third round, fourth round picks, that's what your mindset is get into the AHL as quick as possible. So you take those guys out of the mix, and you're going to have attrition of guys that just give up and say, hey, look, I've played 1, 2, 3 years in major junior hockey. I want to go work on the farm. I want to go play U Sport hockey and go to college, in my hometown. That's the other pull we haven't talked about yet. Unlike the U.S., the WHL, the OHL, and the Quebec, they have just an enormous amount of pride around their local teams. Local boys play for local teams quite a bit in those markets, and it could be regional. You could have a kid that's playing on a team in the Alberta market that's from Alberta, or a kid from BC playing in that Western market. But we don't see as much of that. We don't have as much loyalty to we have virtually no loyalty to a local junior team. You just don't see it. Maybe at the tier 3 level, we see some loyalty because you play for your local rink team that's been there since you were a kid. But we don't have that in the United States. We don't have that. Oh my gosh, I'm not growing up wanting to play um, for that junior team because they're usually in a market that's far away from me. You talk to kids from Michigan, you talk to kids from New York, you talk to kids from Mass, you talk to kids from East Coast, and they don't go, "Oh wow, my dream has been to play for any of the teams. My whole dream is to go out and play for you name fill in the blank on the USHL team." It just doesn't happen. We don't have, they're not knocking on the door saying, all my whole life I've wanted to play for Madison. Most kids that are playing U14 and U16 and below can't name, more than one or two, if any, USHL teams. We don't have that same draw. And that's one of the biggest reasons that they do showcases and do things on the East Coast. The Pittsburgh showcase they've done is to try to get some name recognition and some brand recognition to the league. It just doesn't have as much. So I hope that makes sense. I hope we did some good here tonight. I had fun talking to you. I had fun trying to discuss this. I told you, there's so many avenues, and the spokes coming off of junior hockey and NCAA hockey are just going in all different directions on this wheel. And there's so much to discuss on this, and we'll continue to do that over the next several weeks and months, maybe a couple years, as we try to develop a new structure. I mean, really, when I put that guy on the video today going, boom, if you think about this, it's kind of blowing up our whole model and starting over again. So we'll see how it works. We'll see how it goes. I really want to hear your comments. I would really love to hear what you have to say, folks. And thank you so much for tuning in, and we will